The killing of Kate Bushell, 25 years of questions. A community shattered. Imagine this, it's a quiet Saturday afternoon in Exeter, Devon, November 15, 1997. The leaves are crisp, the air carries the sharp chill of an English autumn, and the little village lanes are calm, almost sleepy. In the middle of this tranquility, a crime so brutal, so shocking, tears apart not just a family, but an entire community. This is the story of Kate Bushell, a bright 14-year-old girl whose life was stolen in a way no one could have imagined. A crime that remains unsolved to this day. But this is not just a story about a single tragedy. It is a story about how unsolved murders echo through decades, affecting families, communities, and even national conversations about justice. It is about how science evolves, how memories linger, and how justice delayed can feel like justice denied. Kate was a typical teenager, full of life, dreams, and innocence. Described by those who knew her as kind, intelligent, and responsible, she was the sort of young girl who left a positive impression wherever she went. She loved school, excelled in her studies, and was musically talented. Friends recall her being cheerful, with a warm smile that lit up her room. She had a promising future ahead, the kind of girl her teachers might say could be anything she wanted to be. But behind that simple teenage joy, there was also responsibility. Kate often helped neighbors with small chores, and she had taken on the task of walking a neighbor's dog from time to time, a task that would tragically place her in the wrong place at the wrong time. To understand the weight of this crime, we need to understand Exeter in 1997. Exeter is a historic cathedral city in Devon, a place where people felt safe. This wasn't London with its big city crime problems. It was a community where children played in the streets, neighbors knew each other, and violent crime was rare. The Devon countryside gave a sense of peace and protection. People believed terrible crimes happened somewhere else, not here, not in their town. Which is why Kate's murder wasn't just a crime, it was a rupture in the community's sense of safety, something that scarred Exeter for decades. The day of the murder. On that November day, Kate left home to walk a neighbor's dog along a familiar footpath near Exeter, on the outskirts of Exeter. She wasn't far from home. She wasn't doing anything unusual. It was a simple, everyday routine. But somewhere along that route, something went horribly, tragically wrong. Kate's life was brutally taken. She was found with fatal knife wounds to her throat, in what police described as a frenzied and motiveless attack. There was no evidence of robbery. No clear motive. Nothing that explained why someone would want to harm her. The discovery of Kate's body shocked not only her family but also the wider Exeter community. The police were immediately called, and soon, the once quiet lanes of Exeter were flooded with forensic teams, police officers, and media vans. The sheer violence of the attack stunned investigators. This wasn't a case of teenage bullying gone wrong or an accident. This was something darker, the deliberate act of someone with violent intent. And from the very beginning, it was clear, this crime would not be solved easily. Immediate impact on the community. News spread fast. Parents who once let their children walk freely now kept them close. Rumors ran wild. Was there a killer on the loose? Was it someone local? Could it happen again? In a close-knit community like Exeter, fear mixed with suspicion. People began to look at neighbors differently. The idea that a predator could be among them haunted families. Local schools brought in grief counselors. Churches held vigils. The Bushell family's pain became the community's pain. But even in those first days, one thing became clear: this wasn't going to be resolved quickly. The murder of Kate Bushell was destined to become one of Devon's most haunting unsolved crimes. The murder of 14-year-old Kate Bushell quickly became one of the largest and most complex investigations in Devon and Cornwall Police history. From the start, detectives faced two major problems. 1. The attack seemed motiveless. 2. The suspect left very little behind. When forensic teams arrived at the scene where Kate's body was found, they were faced with a grim picture. She had been attacked along a popular dog-walking route, a path many in the neighborhood used daily. Her throat had been cut in what investigators called a frenzied knife attack. The sheer violence shocked even seasoned detectives. But strangely, nothing appeared stolen. Her clothing and belongings were intact. This immediately raised the chilling possibility that the attack was random, which is one of the most frightening kinds of crimes. But detectives were careful. They combed the area for any trace evidence: fibers, hair, fingerprints, footprints, discarded weapons. What they found was frustratingly little. No knife. No obvious fingerprints. Just fragments, the kinds of clues that alone couldn't point to a clear suspect. The police launched a massive witness appeal. They knocked on doors, interviewed neighbors, and even set up roadside checkpoints to speak to anyone who might have seen something unusual that day. Several witnesses recalled seeing a man acting suspiciously in the area near the murder scene. Descriptions varied, but most mentioned a man in his 30s or 40s. Dark hair. Wearing a distinctive light blue tracksuit. This became one of the central leads in the investigation, the mysterious blue tracksuit man. But despite widespread appeals, posters, and even televised reconstructions, this man was never conclusively identified. For Kate's family, the investigation was agonizing. Imagine the pain, grieving a daughter while also enduring media attention, endless questions, and the uncertainty of not knowing who had done this or why. Her parents, particularly her father Jerry Bushell, made repeated appeals to the public. They stood before cameras, holding back tears, begging anyone with information to come forward. Each appeal was a reminder of the human cost of this unsolved crime. Over the years, hundreds of people were interviewed. Some were formally questioned, some cleared, others remained persons of interest. One, local men in Exeter. Naturally, suspicion first fell on men known to the area, especially those with histories of violence. But no one fit perfectly. 2. Known offenders. detectives cross-checked known sex offenders in the region. Yet, again, there was no strong link. 3. The blue tracksuit man. Despite widespread effort, he vanished into legend. Was he a real suspect? Or a red herring? Some argued he was critical, others suggested he was an innocent jogger unfairly remembered. For family and friends, as is standard, the police also looked at Kate's inner circle. But there was nothing to suggest involvement. Her death was not connected to any personal grudge or conflict. Forensic challenges in the 1990s. We all know that today, we live in a world of advanced DNA analysis, digital records, and CCTV cameras on almost every street. But in 1997, things were very different. DNA profiling existed, but it was primitive compared to today. Even if investigators had traced DNA, it would have been extremely difficult to process. CCTV coverage in Exeter was minimal. Unlike London, smaller cities didn't have cameras everywhere. Mobile phone tracking was barely in its infancy. There were no smartphone pings or GPS records to trace movements. This meant detectives had to rely heavily on witness memory, shoe leather policing, and local intelligence. And memory, as we know, can be unreliable. Several theories began to circulate about what really happened that day. 1. Random stranger attack, the most frightening possibility. A man passing through Exeter, unknown to locals, who attacked Kate for reasons that may never be understood. 2. Local offender known to police, possibility that the killer was someone already in the system but hadn't yet been matched. 3. Someone following Kate, could the attacker have watched her movements, knowing she walked the dog? A chilling thought that raised fears of stalking. For the mistaken identity, was Kate the victim of mistaken identity? Had the attacker targeted her believing she was someone else? The truth remained elusive. Each theory had weaknesses. At its peak, more than 200 officers were involved in the case. Detectives carried out over 5,000 house-to-house inquiries and took more than 11,000 statements. This was no small investigation. It was one of the biggest Devon and Cornwall Police had ever mounted. And yet, despite the manpower, the time, and the resources, no one was ever charged. By the early 2000s, the case had gone cold. For Kate's family, that meant living in limbo. For Exeter, it meant living with fear. Even today, some older residents still recall the sense of dread that followed the murder. Parents who once let children play freely began restricting them. Women walking alone felt watched. Unsolved crimes have a way of poisoning communities, planting seeds of mistrust and anxiety. The absence of closure is itself a wound. And so, year after year, appeals were renewed, anniversaries marked, and each time the same question asked: who killed Kate Bushell? When Kate was murdered in 1997, forensic science was at a crossroads. DNA profiling had been used in famous cases like Colin Pitchfork's conviction, 1980s, but it was still expensive, slow, and limited. Back then, a usable DNA profile required a relatively large, clean sample. Traces from skin cells, hair, or partial fingerprints were often useless. The tools we take for granted today, rapid DNA testing, touch DNA, genetic genealogy, simply didn't exist. This explains why, despite detectives carefully collecting fibers, hair, and clothing samples from Kate's body and the crime scene, no breakthrough came in the first decade. But science does not stand still. By the 2000s and especially into the 2010s, DNA technology leapt forward. Suddenly, even microscopic evidence could reveal profiles. Entire databases of offenders were created. Tiny samples could be amplified, analyzed, and compared. This shift gave cold cases like Kate's a new chance at life. Devon and Cornwall Police, like many forces, established cold case units. Their task was simple but monumental: revisit unsolved murders, apply new science, and hope for breakthroughs. Kate's murder was reviewed multiple times, with fresh forensic testing carried out on evidence collected in 1997. Police consistently maintained that forensic material from the killer may have been recovered. They didn't always specify details, but the hint alone gave hope. Somewhere, in the fibers or microscopic traces, the answer might be hidden. The case was never shelved. Detectives repeatedly described it as active, and every few years new appeals would bring Kate's face back into the news. One of the most powerful tools to emerge after 1997 was the creation of the UK's National DNA Database, NDNAD. Every person arrested for certain crimes would have their DNA recorded and stored. Over time, this database grew to millions of profiles. The idea was simple: if the killer of Kate Bushell was ever arrested for another crime, even decades later, his DNA could be compared against the trace samples from the 1997 scene. This is why cold cases can still be solved after so long. Criminals rarely stop offending. Even if they manage to escape justice once, their patterns often bring them back into the system. Over the years, police and media campaigns kept Kate's case alive. On key anniversaries, the 10th, the 20th, and most recently the 25th, detectives reappeared on television, standing where Kate's body was found, urging people to speak up. They reminded the public of two crucial things. 1. Someone knows. Even if the killer himself has kept silent, perhaps a friend, partner, or relative suspects the truth. 2. Allegiances change over time. A person unwilling to talk in 1997 might feel differently in 2022. Relationships break, guilt grows heavier, secrets become unbearable. One of the most dramatic breakthroughs in solving cold cases worldwide has been forensic genealogy. You might remember the case of the Golden State Killer in the U.S., solved after decades using genealogical DNA databases. By matching partial DNA profiles to distant relatives who had submitted samples for ancestry websites, investigators could narrow down suspects to specific families. While this method has not, at least publicly, been applied to Kate's case, it represents a ray of hope. If the killer's DNA is in the system, even indirectly, forensic genealogy could eventually close the net. To appreciate the power of modern forensics, consider a few examples. The murder of Lynette White, Cardiff, 1988. Initially, 3 innocent men were convicted. But DNA testing in the 2000s identified the real killer, Jeffrey Gafford, who had escaped justice for 15 years. The murder of Rachel Nicholl, London, 1992. 4 years, the wrong man was targeted. Only in 2008 did advances in DNA prove that Robert Napper was the real killer. The Golden State Killer, California, 1970s alias Joseph DeAngelo was unmasked in 2018 using genealogical DNA, after decades of terrorizing communities. These cases prove something important: time is no longer the enemy of justice. Science, patience, and perseverance mean killers can still be caught even after decades. For Exeter, forensic advances became a double-edged sword. On one hand, they brought hope. Maybe this year they'll solve it. On the other, they prolonged the pain. Each new appeal reignited the trauma for Kate's family and neighbors. Imagine living in that community, knowing that perhaps the killer walked among you. Someone you passed on the street, someone sitting in the same pub, someone who never faced consequences. That lingering uncertainty is why unsolved murders haunt communities long after the headlines fade. Kate's case reminds us of a hard truth: justice delayed is not always justice denied. But the waiting can be brutal. Families live with open wounds, investigators wrestle with frustration, and entire communities carry unease. Yet the passage of time also allows for something remarkable: new science, new tools, and new courage among witnesses. What was impossible in 1997 might be routine in 2025. That's why police have never given up. And why many still believe Kate's killer will one day be unmasked. For Kate Bushell's family, November 1997 wasn't just the month they lost their daughter and sister. It was the month time froze. When a crime is solved quickly, families at least receive closure. They may never get over the loss, but they can rest knowing that justice was served. In Kate's case, there has been no closure for nearly 3 decades. Imagine being her parents, her brother, her close relatives. Every anniversary is a reopening of the wound. Every police appeal, every news headline, every time her name is mentioned, the family is dragged back into the nightmare. Her father, in particular, once spoke of the agony of not knowing. That single phrase, not knowing, is one of the cruelest burdens. Not knowing who killed her. Not knowing why. Not knowing if the killer is still out there, perhaps living an ordinary life. That lack of answers becomes a daily torment. What about the police officers who worked Kate's case? Homicide detectives are trained to deal with trauma. They see horrific scenes, comfort grieving families, and pursue justice relentlessly. But there is something uniquely painful about an unsolved case. For those who worked the early investigation in 1997, Kate's murder is described as one that stayed with them. Detectives spoke of the frustration of chasing thousands of leads that led nowhere, of conducting house-to-house inquiries across Exeter, of interviewing suspects only to release them for lack of evidence. And then, year after year, they had to return to the same site, the quiet lane near Exwick Cemetery where Kate's life ended, hoping that this time, something would break open. Some officers have retired, others moved on, but the weight of an unsolved child murder doesn't leave with retirement papers. Many carry it as unfinished business for the rest of their lives. Now, let's turn to the community. Exeter, like many towns in Devon, is known for its peace, safety, and sense of close-knit belonging. But after November 15, 1997, that sense of safety was shattered. Parents became more cautious. Teenagers who once walked home alone from friends' houses or part-time jobs were now escorted. Streets that had seemed safe suddenly felt sinister. Rumors spread. Was it someone local? Was the killer a stranger passing through? Could it happen again? In small communities, fear can ripple like a stone thrown into a pond. Everyone feels it, even if no one speaks of it. The longer the case remains unsolved, the longer that fear lingers. It becomes a shadow, a reminder that evil once walked among them and might still be there. Why does an unsolved crime weigh so heavily? Psychologists suggest that our minds crave resolution. We seek beginnings, middles, and endings to stories. When a crime story remains unfinished, it gnaws at people. For Kate's family, the unanswered questions are brutal. But even for ordinary residents of Exeter, the lack of resolution turns the murder into something almost mythic. It becomes part of the town's folklore, the girl who was killed, and no one knows who did it. This creates not only fear but also frustration. Communities want to trust the police, but when decades pass without results, cynicism grows. People may wonder, are they doing enough? Did they miss something? Even if it's unfair, those doubts creep in. One of the haunting aspects of unsolved crimes is the possibility that someone, somewhere, knows more than they've said. Police have always believed Kate's killer may have been seen, perhaps by someone who didn't realize the importance of what they saw, or by someone too afraid to come forward. For those potential witnesses, silence becomes its own prison. Imagine carrying the weight of a secret for 25 years. Imagine replaying in your mind the detail you didn't share, the suspicion you ignored, the call you never made. That kind of silence can eat away at a person. Some people eventually break and confess what they know, but others carry it to the grave. Studies of communities affected by unsolved murders show long-term effects. Increased suspicion of strangers. More protective parenting styles. A sense of unfinished business hanging over local history. A psychological association between the area and tragedy. Even people who weren't alive in 1997 may grow up in Exeter hearing the name Kate Bushell whispered. The case becomes part of local identity, just as the names Soham or Ipswich are forever linked to other murders. Kate's case is not just a local tragedy. It's an example of how unsolved crimes scar societies everywhere. From JonBenet Ramsey in the United States to Jill Dando in London, unsolved murders capture imaginations because they represent something we all fear, the idea that evil can strike, and justice may never come. And yet, paradoxically, they also inspire hope. Each new forensic breakthrough, each anniversary appeal, each story retold reminds us that the case is still alive. For Kate Bushell's family and community, the hope is that one day, someone will speak up or science will reveal what silence has hidden. When we look at Kate Bushell's story, we're not just revisiting the brutal killing of a teenager. We're confronting the painful reality that some crimes remain unfinished stories. For nearly 3 decades, this case has hovered like a ghost over Exeter, a reminder that justice can be delayed, that answers are not always immediate. And yet, the lesson is this: justice delayed is not always justice denied. History shows us that killers who think they've escaped justice are often caught decades later. In the UK, the 1975 murder of Lynn Wheaton, a 16-year-old girl, went unsolved for over 40 years until DNA linked it to John Cannon, a serial offender. In the United States, the infamous Golden State Killer was unmasked in 2018 after over 30 years, thanks to breakthroughs in DNA genealogy. For Kate's case, advances in forensic science, especially the ability to extract usable DNA from the smallest samples, mean there is still hope. Even a single hair, a speck of skin, or fibers could one day unmask her killer. The lesson? The truth has a way of rising, even after decades. Lesson 2: communities must stay vigilant. Unsolved crimes are not just the responsibility of the police. Communities play a role too. Police have long believed someone, somewhere, knows more than they've revealed about Kate's murder. It could be a witness who dismissed what they saw, a friend who overheard a suspicious comment, or even someone who has lived with guilty knowledge for years. Cases crack open when people choose courage over silence. Communities that remain vigilant, keeping memories alive, supporting appeals, sharing information, become partners in justice. For Exeter, remembering Kate is not just about mourning the past. It's about keeping the flame of justice alive. Lesson 3: families teach us perseverance. Perhaps the most powerful lesson comes from Kate's family. Despite unimaginable grief, they have remained steadfast in their call for justice. They've stood before cameras, faced the press, worked with police, and spoken on anniversaries. Their perseverance is a message to all of us. When life hands us unanswered questions, we can either collapse under the weight of why, or we can keep moving forward with hope. Lesson 4: delays are not the end. For detectives, the case reminds us that a cold file is not a closed file. Many officers who worked Kate's case have carried the weight of it into retirement. Some describe it as the one case that haunts them most. But here's the truth: cases like Kate's push law enforcement to innovate. Cold case units, forensic genealogy, new digital tools all exist today because of the persistence demanded by cases that refuse to let go. Delays force us to grow, to rethink, to look again. When you hear about Kate Bushell, you may not know her family personally. You may not live in Exeter. You may not even have been alive in 1997. But her story touches something deeply human in all of us. It reminds us life is fragile. Justice is precious. Hope is powerful. We live in a world where not all stories are neatly tied up, where villains sometimes escape, where families wait for decades. But we also live in a world where truth often outlives lies, where light eventually cracks the darkness, and where the pursuit of justice never really ends. The ongoing quest for justice. Today, Kate Bushell's case is not closed. Devon and Cornwall Police continue to appeal for information. Advances in science mean new evidence could emerge any day. Witnesses could still step forward. A guilty conscience might finally break. And so, the story is not over. It waits. The quest for justice in Kate's murder is a mirror for all of us. Will we grow numb to evil, or will we remain alert? Will we let time silence us, or will we use time to keep asking questions? A life remembered. Kate Bushell was just 14 years old. She loved music, her friends, her family. She was a young girl with dreams ahead of her, cut down in the most senseless way possible. When we speak her name, we're not just talking about a case number. We're remembering a life that mattered, a daughter, a student, a friend, a young soul whose voice was silenced too soon. Her story is not just about tragedy, but about the ripple effect of crime. It changed a family forever. It left a community wounded. It challenged law enforcement for decades. And it still asks questions of all of us today. The unanswered questions. Who killed Kate Bushell? Why was she targeted? What secrets are still being kept after almost 3 decades? Is there someone, somewhere, who knows more than they've ever revealed? These questions haunt Exeter, her family, and every detective who has touched the case. They are the loose ends that turn a crime into a legend, an open wound that refuses to close. The hope of resolution. And yet, hope remains. Every advance in forensic science, every breakthrough in cold case methodology, every public appeal keeps the possibility alive that one day, the name of Kate's killer will finally be spoken in a court of law. It has happened before, cold cases solved after 20, 30, even 40 years. Families finally given answers they thought they'd never hear. Kate's family deserves that same closure. The wider lessons. Kate's case is about more than one crime. It teaches us that communities must never forget their victims. Memory is power. That justice is not always instant, sometimes it is a long, painful journey. That evil thrives in silence, but truth grows when ordinary people speak up. That even when years pass, God's timing and truth have a way of catching up with darkness. A final word to the audience. As we close Kate Bushell's story, let's not allow it to be only about violence and mystery. Let it also be about endurance, hope, and the belief that justice, though delayed, can still come. Kate deserves to be remembered not just as a victim, but as a young girl whose life continues to inspire determination in detectives, resilience in her family, and reflection in all of us. So tonight, as you walk away from this story, ask yourself, what would I do if I held a piece of truth that could help a family heal? What kind of community do I want to help build, one of silence or one of courage? Because ultimately, the story of Kate Bushell is unfinished. The final chapter is yet to be written. And maybe, just maybe, the next clue, the next testimony, the next forensic breakthrough could finally bring her justice. Closing line. Kate's life was short, but her memory is long. And until the day truth speaks louder than silence, we will keep telling her story. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed the video. Backhand index pointing down, tap that thumbs up like button and hit subscribe. Bell, turn on notifications so you never miss a moment. Movie camera, more inspiring content is just one click away. Keep watching.